vsem. Zlasti se opravičujemo v imenu Air France, ki ste morda že včeraj bili na poti, pa ste potem dobili, upam, v zadnjem trenutku obvestilo, da je predavanje bilo predstavljeno. Ne zaradi naše krivde, ampak zato, ker so ga Francozi pustili na letališču v Parizu. Potem, ko so ga včeraj ustavili, so pozabili njegovo prtljago, ampak zdaj vidimo, je prtljaga v tem času tudi že prišla. Jaz sem se v imenu oddelka, ki to so organizirali, lepo pozdravljam. Hkrati vas pozvabim že na jutrišnje predavanje, 10:30, ko bo govoril o svoji osnovni temi o nacionalizmu. Zdaj pa predajam besedo predstavniku soorganizatorja Inštituta za novejšo zgodovino Marku Zajcu, ki bo pa nakratko predstavil našega predavatelja.
Najlepša hvala. Jaz imam tudi veliko čast in zadovoljstvo, da lahko predstavim profesorja Komoseno, tudi v imenu Inštituta za novejšo zgodovino, ki je priskočil v soorganizaciji teh dveh dogodkov in njegovega gostovanja, kar se mi zdi zelo pomembno. Bi vam pa za začetek poskusil, popravil sem tak long listek, da vam nakratko predstavim osnovno nekaj informacij o Tomažu Komoseli. Tomaž Komosela se rodil leta 1967 v kraju Kečni. Kenčežin. Se pravičujem, da sem mogel vprašati, ampak nisem ravno dober v poljskem. V Gornji Šleziji, to, da je prihaja profesor iz Gornje Šlezije, je tudi pomembno za njegovo delo. Magistriral na Šlezijski univerzi v Katovicah, Potchefstroom University v Južni Afriki in Central European University v Pragi, doktoriral na univerzi v Poznanju in se habilitiral na Varšavski univerzi. Raziskoval je v mnogih inštitucijah, recimo na EUI, to je Evropskem univerzitetnem inštitutu v Firenceh, na IVM, Inštitut for Wissenschaft and Menschen, na Dunaju, to je humanistični inštitut za izmenjavo, na Herderjevem inštitutu v Marburgu, recimo, ki je tudi privrstna institucija za preučevanje vzhodne Evrope, in nazadnje na Slovanskem raziskovalnem centru v Saporu, s katerim ima stike tudi Filozofska fakulteta in naš inštitut. Učil je tudi na Trinity Collegeu v Dublinu in na Ekonomski univerzi v Krakovu. Trenutno predava zgodovino Srednje Evrope v 19. in 20. stoletju na prestižni škotski univerzi, kot vidite, University of St. Andrews. Poleg zgodovine nacionalizmov predava Komosela tudi zgodovino etničnega čiščenja in genocida v zadnjih 2 stoletij, kar je v širšem smislu v bistvu tudi tema današnjega predavanja. Zdaj, njegovega opusa ne bom našteval, ker bi je preveč impresiven in bi lahko uporabil vaš čas, ki je namenjen predavanju. Znan je predvsem po inovativnih raziskavah razmerij med politiko in standardizacijo in kategorizacijo jezikov, o čemer je pisal v zelo odmevni knjigi The Politics of Language and Nationalism in Modern Central Europe, ki šla v Parkwayu 2009. Zemljevid Evrope zelo zanimivo in koristno branje. Njegovo dolgoletno raziskovanje nacionalizma in jezikovnih razmerij na primeru Gornje Šlezije je zaokrožil še v angleški monografiji Schlesия and Central European Nationalism, The Emergence of National and Ethnic Groups in Prussian Schlesия and Austrian Schlesия, šlo Purdue University Press 2007. Sodeluje in je sodeloval pri mnogih kolektivnih monografijah. Naj omenim, veliko jih je tudi uredil, naj omenim zgolj najnovejšo pregledno monografijo The Palgrave Handbook of Slavic Languages, Identities and Borders, ki je šla letos in je uredil skupaj z bivšo študentko in sedajno doktorsko študentko na Firencah Catherine Gibson in japonskim slavistom Otokijem Nomanči. Trenutno pripravlja atlas jezikovnih politik v Srednji Evropi, raziskuje tudi zgodovino izgona turške manjšine iz Bolgarije leta 1989, o čemer bo govora danes. Še nekaj besed o njegovem delu. Komosela zgodovina, kakršnih je malo, fenomena obravnava, po mojem mnenju, v širšem zgodovinskem kontekstu in to ne samo v geografskem in časovnem, ampak tudi na teoretskem. Za njegova dela je značilen poglobljen interdisciplinarni pristop, ki ga kombinira, kar je zelo zanimivo, z lahkotnim narativnim stilom pisanja. Kljub temu, Komosela ne zanemarja posameznih primerov in podrobnosti. Ravno nasprotno, Veliko energije in raziskovalnega napora usmerja v raziskovanje posebnosti, ki jih s pretanjenim občutkom vključi v primerjalno zgodovinsko paradigmo. To razmerje med posameznim in splošnim pa je ena izmed največjih kvalitet njegovega opusa. Zaradi kritičnega odnosa v nacionalizmu in zaradi raziskovalne načelnosti je na Poljskem večkrat prišel konflikt s prevladujočimi nacionalističnimi pogledi na zgodovino. Zdaj vam pa dodajam besedo, ki se bi tam nasedi.
Hvala lepa. Thank you very much for having me over, and thank you to the Department of History and the Institute of Modern History for inviting me, and to the three gentlemen, Rok, Jelle and Marco, whom I had good luck to meet at Cambridge, so that's why I could come here to you. Today I will talk about the ethnic cleansing, which is completely forgotten in Bulgaria. And I will try to speak not longer than 40 to 50 minutes. If I'm overlong, just beacon to me that I should stop, because I would like you to have questions, so we could have a little discussion. I basically stumbled upon this topic having talked to some Bulgarians and having read, it's kind of like one sentence here, one sentence there, that it happened. So, because I have this module at St. Andrews devoted to ethnic cleansing and genocide in 20th century Europe, I wanted just to recommend some books and articles to my students about it. And strangely enough, I found out there is not a single article in any language in which I read, let alone a monograph. And I'm talking also in Bulgarian now. And I'm talking even Turkish. That was really strange. So I decided to have a look at it. And it happened, the ethnic cleansing happened in 1989 in communist Bulgaria, when communism was on the cusp of disappearing, falling apart. So you would think that the part of Europe in which we live and the European history would incorporate these events into the narration of things which happened, but it is absent. So, for instance, when you look at these images, they are immediately recognizable as the Round Table in Poland or as this kind of bloody revolution in Bucharest, in Romania. So, if you have a look at the events across the Soviet bloc and Yugoslavia at the turn of the 1990s, which led to the end of communism and to the democratizing change in some of the states at least, I propose a simple kind of categorization of the events which led to this change. So you could have this negotiations, round table style negotiations. You could have a revolution, kind of grassroots movement, doing away with the communist regime, and the revolution could be either peaceful or violent. And the third model was basically the breakup of Yugoslavia and the breakup of the Soviet Union. Where does Bulgaria fit in among these categories of the end of communism? If you open a typical book about the end of communism in Bulgaria or a survey of the end of communism across the Soviet bloc, you would get such a thing that on November the 10th, 1989, Zhivkov, the communist leader of Bulgaria, was relieved of his duties. The end of communism. Who relieved him of his duties? Another communist. Was it really the end of communism? Does it make sense at all? I propose that if we believe that the November the 10th, 1989 was the end of communism in Bulgaria, it couldn't be the cause of the end of communism. And what was the cause? And I propose that the cause of the end of communism in Bulgaria was this expulsion in the summer of 1989 when 360,000 ethnic Turks and Muslims were expelled across the Iron Curtain border from Bulgaria to Turkey. And these events were preceded by, in May 1989, by huge demonstrations of Muslim and Turkish population in Bulgaria. Turkish population which officially since 1985 had not existed. There had not been any Turks in Bulgaria. So these demonstrations caused the expulsion. The expulsion and the demonstrations caused in turn the end of the communist system, because the whole political system lost legitimacy. The Soviet Union didn't support Zhivkov any longer. And to add to the injury, also the rapid loss of 5% of the population who were concentrated in the countryside meant destabilization of economy. A large part of Bulgarian economy was based on cash crops like tobacco, and out of sudden no one was able to work. Then, if we believe that the 10th of November was the end of communism in Bulgaria, what was the transition to democracy? Because, as you saw on the slide, there was one communist leader replacing another communist leader. And the transition to democracy took some time. Like the first free elections in Bulgaria were only in June 1990, and actually the communists won once again the elections. The first non-communist president took office in August 1990, and the first elections which brought non-communists to power happened only in October 1991. And all these political events were dominated by the fallout of this expulsion, and importantly and unprecedentedly also by the return of close to half of the expellees in this time, meaning September 1989 to the end of September 1989 to the end of 1990. So I propose that without remembering about the expulsion and without remembering about the return of the expellees, we cannot properly understand the shift in Bulgaria from communism to democracy. Here you can see it on the slide, you know, these times, how it was happening. So you have once again, so you can clearly see how the processes were influencing each other. So the Muslim protests start in April, they are in full swing in May, and at the end of May the expulsion begins and Zhivkov is deposed, and then beginning August, September, the return of expellees starts happening. If you have a look at the timeline of the implementation of democratizing changes in Bulgaria, they are connected to the person who is very well known in Bulgaria, but is rather unknown outside Bulgaria, with a certain exception of Turkey. Ahmed Doğan. Ahmed Doğan was the dissident who was imprisoned for 5 years, and in a way he organized this mass opposition, dissident movement based on Turks and Muslims in Bulgaria, and he should be credited, you would think, with the end of communism in Bulgaria, but he's not. So, without further ado, looking at this table, in December '89, he was freed from prison after 5 years in prison. He established this movement for rights and freedoms, which is ostensibly not an ethnic party, but in reality it is pretty ethnic. And this movement petitioned for the return of political and human rights to Turks and Muslims in Bulgaria, and they got it. And this conditioned the elections in 1990, and probably this return of the political and human rights to Turks caused the victory of communists in these elections. And then, beginning with the elections in '91, when non-communists won and formed the government, since the very time this Turkish party, Movement for Rights and Freedoms, has been until today either a coalition partner of a party constituting the government at a given time in Bulgaria, or it was a supporting partner in the parliament of each and single Bulgarian government until today. So that's the importance of this movement, which is still forgotten. So, once again, the return of expellees, which happened between August '89 and September 1990. And another important thing, the return was met with a backlash. Why are you coming back? What are you doing? You should be in Turkey. So there was a steep rise in ethnic tension, which could have led to a civil war. As you know, in parallel, we know what happened in Yugoslavia. You know better than me. So it was almost exactly the same situation which could break up the country, but it didn't happen. So that's why it's also important to discuss the case of Bulgaria in conjunction and as a point of reference for the recent history of Yugoslavia and the post-Yugoslav states. So, this is the missing picture. The tragedy is remembered among Muslims and Turks in Bulgaria, is remembered in Turkey, but nowhere else. It should have been remembered in Yugoslavia, but Yugoslavia kind of came apart and people were busy with wars, ethnic cleansing, establishing new borders, and it got forgotten. But if you look at the primary sources, the only newspapers where the events were reported, not buried in the middle of the newspaper, but on the front page, was Turkey and Yugoslavia. For instance, in July, the 7th edition of Politica, you had it on the front page. It's thanks to Marco and Tierney I got access to some of that stuff. Rumen Abramov, who is one of renowned Bulgarian historians of economy and modern history, yeah, I should let you know. I got so much disgusted by the silence about the event that I started writing an article last year and spilled over into a full-scale monograph, which I hope to finish this summer, so maybe next year it will be published. So Rumen Abramov was so kind to read through my manuscript and comment on it, and he said, criticizing my thesis that the expulsion was of such an import that communists would collapse in Bulgaria anyway. I agree with that. However, without the expulsions, the nature of the collapse would be different, would not be so ethnicized. Because anyway, the collapse of communism as a system across the Soviet bloc countries would not be possible without the decision taken by Mikhail Gorbachev to let it happen. Because Mikhail Gorbachev or his circle could have said, well, we don't like it, we would send tanks over there. That would be the end of it. So I propose that the expulsion of the Muslims and Turks and the return of them saliently conditioned the character of the fall of communism in Bulgaria and the character of the transition period which led to democratization in Bulgaria. And as I've already pointed out about this movement for rights and freedoms, because the party is of such an importance for the entire political system in Bulgaria, the significance of this event of 1989 continue to this day, to this very day. Once again, a couple of pictures. If I would, when first time I showed these pictures to my students and asked them, what that? They were telling me, Nagorno-Karabakh, Kosovo, Bosnia, Syrian refugees. Yeah? Well, no, it happened in 1989 in the summer when the Turks and Muslims went from Bulgaria. Here you have two standard works in German and in English on ethnic cleansing and genocide in the 20th century Europe. Not a mention of these events. Once again, another picture, when the refugees arrived in Turkey, you had refugee camps, people spilling out from the overcrowded trains, like now Syrian refugees going places, but it happened in 1989. When there was the 25th anniversary of the event, you had some commemorative books published in Turkey. But these books are extremely hard to get. They were published in minuscule numbers, and it took me like 1 year to get one of these books. It is 89 Richard, the Great Migration. So for all practical reasons, the events are also forgotten in Turkey. Why is it important to remember? Why is it important not to forget about this event, which is within the living memories of millions of people? When it was unfolding in the summer of 1989, it was the largest ethnic cleansing in post-war Europe after the wrapping up of the Potsdam so-called population transfers, meaning sending Germans from Central Europe to Germany and Austria. And it was also extremely intensive, because we are talking about the expulsion of 360,000 people in the span of 2 months in summer. And 360,000 people at the time was 5% of Bulgaria's population. Just trying to get the scale of it into your awareness. And then, when at the beginning of the 21st century, the UN and the Council of Europe were talking about the new human rights, the right to homeland, they were pointing out to what happened in Kosovo. In Kosovo, there was the expulsion of Albanians and the return of 90% of them after the NATO intervention. And it was the first ever. It wasn't the first ever event of this kind. Because the first ever event of this kind that expellees returned, or were allowed to return and to return, happened in the case of these Bulgarian Turks and Muslims. So that's why it's important to remember from the perspective of European history and the history of human rights about these events. So now I will focus why it should be important to remember about these events in Bulgaria, for Bulgarian history and for Bulgarian politics and for the peaceful future of Bulgaria. Because forgetting about such a tragic event and suppressing the knowledge of it may result in the future in all kinds of radical movements which would be clamoring for the recognition of these events. So I've already talked to you about Ahmed Douan. I believe in light of his work as a dissident who got imprisoned for 5 years, and despite all these setbacks to organize a mass opposition, mass dissident movement, which staged mass demonstrations in April and May 1989, demonstrations which were gathering anything between 60,000 people to 100,000 people, should be recognized actually as Bulgaria's Havel or as Bulgaria's Wałęsa. On the other hand, the person who is very well known, and rightly so, Zheliu Zhelev, the first non-communist president of Bulgaria, he is also recognized as a dissident. However, his dissidency was kind of intellectual character. He was never imprisoned, he never organized any mass movement, but when this kind of democratization changes took place at the turn of 1990, the opposition parties which emerged at the time and started getting larger memberships, they decided that Zheliu Zhelev should be their representative. Why not Ahmed Douan? Well, ethno-linguistic nationalist. Ahmed Douan is a Turk, yeah, so that's the problem. However, it does not have to be a problem, it's just enough to have a look at Romania. Like the changes in Romania started with this Pastor Tücleș, who was opposing Ceausescu. And it led to the spiral of events which led to the violent revolution in Bucharest in 1989. But everything started in Timișoara, where Tücleș was pastor. And he is an ethnic Hungarian, and he is acknowledged. And nowadays, actually, in Romania, president is an ethnic German. So it is possible to transcend ethnic differences. In Bulgaria, they still think it is not possible. So, Zheliu Zhelev died last year. Ahmed Douan is still alive, but Ahmed Douan is not remembered. Probably never heard about Ahmed Douan. Has anyone heard about Ahmed Douan? Unfortunately so. Why else is important to remember about the events in Bulgaria? I give such a thesis that the period between the establishment of Bulgaria as a nation state in 1877 till the expulsion in 1989 was the period of national revolution. National revolution meaning the process of homogenization of the population of the nation state, so that everybody would be a true Bulgarian. What does it mean? A true Bulgarian means basically being Slavic, Slavophone, and Orthodox Christian. So no Muslims and no people speaking other languages. And in a way, it was happening, be it under King, before the war and during the war, and under the Soviet-style system which was established in Bulgaria. And Zhivkov's decision about the expulsion was this desire to get more legitimacy from this national program. The anti-Turkish, anti-Muslim demonstrations in Bulgaria in 1990 and 1991 were huge. They were gathering in Sofia literally around 1 million people out of the population of more or less 9 million people. So it was really huge. And that's why I'm stressing the point that the demonstrations could have easily spilled out into a civil war, because already in these Turkish-dominated areas, there were the towns. In the towns, usually you have ethnic Bulgarian majority. They were clamoring for establishing their own true Bulgarian republic, to get away from Bulgaria, where Turks can be treated equally. So it was a very tragic moment. However, the opposition, I mean the democratic opposition, which then seized power in '91, seized power in cooperation with this Turkish party. They didn't press charges against the anti-Turkish demonstrators. They tried to regulate the politics in such a way that it would become inclusive and would not lead to the war. So it was a real achievement, and it should be also heralded. And also this Turkish party, Movement for Rights and Freedom, should be acknowledged, because it is the only, in democratic Bulgaria, it is the only party which has survived since 1989 to today. All the other parties in Bulgaria splintered, changed their names, changed their programs. So you could seriously propose that this Turkish ethnic party of the Movement for Rights and Freedoms is the pillar of political and social stability in today's Bulgaria, a pillar which is forgotten. And the pillar is, if this pillar is gone, but things in Bulgaria may go really wrong. Who was responsible for this expulsion? Obviously Zhivkov. But no one is accusing him in a scholarly publication, in the press, of anything. And he was no different from Karadzic or Milosevic. He practiced the politics of ethnic cleansing. And it was recognized in the 2012 declaration of the Bulgarian parliament, which condemned the expulsions and the forced assimilation of the Turks and Muslims in communist Bulgaria. And actually they used the term that what happened in '89 was an act of ethnic cleansing. But none of my Bulgarian colleagues knows about it. And none of Bulgarian politicians act upon this declaration. Because you would think there's such a declaration, well, the guys responsible for ethnic cleansing would be pursued and prosecuted. Never happened. So, because obviously Zhivkov was not the only ethnic cleanser. These guys were ethnic cleansers too. These were his close collaborators during the communist times, and they were architects of forced assimilation of Turks and Muslims and of the expulsion in '89. These two, and these guys were surviving into the post-communist period as presidents and prime ministers. That's crazy, you would think, you know. Nothing happened to them. Some of them are still alive. And what happened to Zhivkov? Zhivkov became a living icon. He, in beginning, with the mid-1990s, out of sudden, you had a cult of personality of Zhivkov emerging across Bulgaria. Why? Because the economic changes and reforms brought unemployment, poverty, and so on and so on. So out of sudden, wow, Zhivkov was the guy under whom we lived well. And you see this guy behind Zhivkov here, Boyko Borisov. Nowadays he's Prime Minister of Bulgaria. and in the latter half of 1980s, he was in the employ of the Interior Ministry. So he was one of the guys carrying out of this expulsion, this ethnic cleansing, whatever, however you name it. Obviously, at the low key, he was not a decision maker, but in the latter half of the 1990s, he was the personal bodyguard of Zhivkov, going to all these functions which were staged for Zhivkov. And nowadays, Boyko Borisov is praising Zhivkov as our great lobby. So he's praising an ethnic cleanser. I mean, that does not happen in the European Union, that the leader of a EU member state would be publicly praising an ethnic cleanser. Even in Serbia, although the leadership of Serbia may like Milosevic and privately praise him, they would never do it in public. The only politician, leader who is praising an ethnic cleanser and genocidar, like Stalin, is in public, is Vladimir Putin. That's really striking, I would say. But no one's raising an eyebrow. So here you have this Halikun years of Zhivkov when he was going all across the country like the true leader of the country in the 1990s. Welcome, cheered, feted, and so on and so on. And look how people were treating him. Like their personal friend, like the savior. Oh, we are coming to our village, now everything will be fine. And there was the funeral. Funeral was completely private. That doesn't look like a private funeral. De facto, it was completely official. And it looks like, you know, one of these funerals of the first parties, the party's first secretaries across the Soviet bloc countries, like Brezhnev, for instance. Some bloggers comment on it that Borisov is not different from Zhivkov, but you know, it's a minority pursuit. No one takes bloggers seriously. Where is the serious thing? In Pravets, you have now the town of Zhivkov's birth. You have actually Zhivkov Disneyland. It is the whole city, the whole town is devoted to the cult of Zhivkov nowadays. And look at one of these monuments in today's Pravets. Which is on which you can find the words of Zhivkov from his memoirs, which were, you know, Zhivkov during communist times wrote 30 volumes of communist sturdy prose, no one reads it. But in 1997 or 96, he published memoirs, and they were a runaway bestseller. Went into several editions, and these are the words from his memoirs. I used all the power I had for the good of my nation. Wait a moment. So it was for the good of these Bulgarian citizens who got expelled in 1989 too. Wonder. And it continues. You have pictures from you know, these official celebrations which happen nowadays. Look. And billboards, you know, this capitalist thing. Here, come here, we'll have another birthday party for our leader Zhivkov. And new monuments are being unveiled, and this monument from 2013 was unveiled by Zhivkov's granddaughter, who is an MP. It's like, you know, like Mussolini's granddaughter returning to the parliament. I mean, wow, what's going on? So, I would say it's kind of summary that you cannot understand properly Bulgaria's history and the history of the Soviet bloc and the end of communism in it without remembering about the role of Ahmed Doğan, the dissident mass movement he organized, and without remembering about the expulsion. The changes, from communism to democracy in Bulgaria, they are referred to as Goliamata Promena, the big change. It's a figure of speech actually taken from German, Die Wende. But I'm claiming there were three Goliamata, three big ones. There was first of all the Goliamata Exkursia, this big expulsion, then Golea Matozavrashani, this big return, and only then this big promena, big change happened. Why is it important to remember about the expulsion in Turkey? In Turkey, people should remember about it because, importantly, it was the only ever mass expulsion across the Iron Curtain border, which was not in any way official, unofficially maybe, but officially it was in no way negotiated between Moscow and Washington, and there was no war, and the border was serious. Yeah. On the other hand, it led to the situation when 300,000 people had dual citizenship, Turkish and Bulgarian. And at that time, neither Turkey nor Bulgaria accepted any dual citizenship. And out of sudden, during this kind of difficult 90s, when there were economic difficulties, these people with dual citizenship could move easily between Bulgaria and Turkey. In Bulgaria they lived, and they had their own dacha, and in Turkey they were. Yeah? So before Bulgaria joined the European Union, before Bulgarian citizens were allowed to go across the European Union and find work in Western Europe, they could actually find work and good life in Turkey. And importantly, to this day, Bulgaria is the only post-Ottoman state with a large minority of Turks and Muslims. So, despite of all this forced assimilation and ethnic cleansing, Muslims constitute sizable, Muslims and Turks constitute a sizable percentage of Bulgaria's population, and also a similar, a big number of Bulgarian-born Muslims live in today's Turkey. Okay, maybe this one, this section of my talk is of most important interest to you, because I propose that without remembering about this ethnic cleansing in 1989, it's also impossible to understand properly the events which led to the wars of Yugoslav succession and to genocide and ethnic cleansing in the course of these wars. I work at St. Andrews, and St. Andrews is very well known in Britain for conflict studies. We have 2 centers of conflict studies. Some of my friends are working in the centers of conflict studies, and they are interested in studying the Yugoslav case, however you want to term it and name it. And I always keep asking them, so what was the cause? How come that, the likes of Milosevic, Karadzic, Tudjman and others were thinking that it would be a good idea to ethnically cleanse a place, meaning to take a population you don't like and to send from territory A to territory B, and that nothing would happen. And they are flabbergasted, yeah? They don't have an answer. And there are zillions of monographs and articles about the causes and the course of the wars of Yugoslav succession. I propose that Milosevic, Karadzic, Tudjman, they knew very well about this ethnic cleansing which happened in Bulgaria, because it was reported on the front pages of Yugoslav papers and also of Slovenian language newspapers in Yugoslavia. So these people knew that when this ethnic cleansing happened, Zhivkov sending the 360,000 people from Bulgaria to Turkey, neither the East nor the West reacted. So, ethnic or population transfer, as international law has it, was still a legal instrument of doing international relations. Actually, if you take monographs on population exchanges and population transfers which were published in the between 1950 and 1980, they propose, yeah, it is painful to people, but this instrument basically is an instrument of safeguarding human rights. So what happened in 1989 was the end of thinking about population exchange and transfer as an instrument of safeguarding human rights. So Milosevic, Karadzic, Tudjman, and the company, they were thinking, fine, so that's how it is. And what actually we are doing for safeguarding human rights. And they were right. No one reacted. The East never reacted, the East meaning the Russian Federation. And the West reacted only in 95. And only since 95, we have a new thinking about population exchanges and population transfers and understanding that it is not good, that it is actually a crime against humanity. Zhivkov died in 98. The change in thinking about ethnic cleansing, that it isn't an instrument of safeguarding human rights, but actually is breaching human rights, came with the founding of the International Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which was founded in 93. The first guys were inducted in the mid-90s, indicted in the mid-90s, and Slobodan Milosevic was indicted in 1999. No one ever thought, maybe people thought, but no one ever thought about officially, about bringing Zhivkov to the dock in the court. And here we are, in the strange situation that in Europe, some ethnic cleansers are bad guys, they are condemned, they are tried, and they are sentenced. And some ethnic cleansers are our guys, and we accept them. And we even praise them, that they were good leaders. And I'm finishing with this kind of slogan, almost, let me forget. You've already forgotten, unfortunately. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the speaker for this very interesting and intriguing lecture. Zdaj vas to vabim, da našega gosta tudi vprašate in da se odpreme ena debata. In vas prosim za vaše vprašanje, pripombe. Če komu ne gre v angleščini, lahko poskušamo jaz, pa tudi mogoče rok prevesti. Prosim.
How was the expulsion actually carried out on ground level? I mean, were there paramilitary units, or were the people just voluntarily, or?
That's a very interesting question, because that's one of the arguments posed by Bulgarian scholars that it was not expulsion. It was just emigration. And it was, that's why you have this mendacious Bulgarian term for referring to this expulsion, Golyamata expulsia, big excursion. Why big excursion? Because it was happening in light of reports from the mass media, Bulgarian mass media. The Bulgarian TV, the Bulgarian press were reporting on this. And you can have a look at, one Bulgarian newscast from one of the days in the summer of 1989, and they are coming basically to a family in a car with all their things on the roof, and they're asking them, why are you going to Turkey? What happened so suddenly? We just thought we would go for a holiday. Obviously it's staged, and they couldn't say what was happening. So on this basis, on this very superficial basis of these reports, many Bulgarian scholars are saying, these people just wanted to have a better life and to go to the West, because in Bulgaria at the time Turkey was perceived as the West, as part of the West. However, maybe to explain to answer your question in a bit roundabout way, I have to tell you how I came about to know about this ethnic cleansing. When in '99 I participated in a conference in Pittsburgh, in Pennsylvania, on ethnic cleansing and genocide in 20th century Europe. The keynote speech was given by General Hayden. General Hayden at that time was the director of NSA, this National Security Agency. This is the biggest one. They are controlling our texts and the email exchange and so on and so on. And he told me, he was speaking obviously about Yugoslavia. Then I had this kind of private talk with him and what he was doing in '89, and he told me that he was in Bulgaria. And he, as basically a secret agent, but he was obviously a diplomat on the surface of it. He was monitoring the military movements across Bulgaria. And he told me that they noticed that in March, April, May, all the military units were going into place for something. And then they started rounding up people and sending them away. But this rounding up, as I found out talking to people who actually lived through it, it wasn't like this, that they were coming to your house and they were telling you to go. It was done in such a way, like telephoning, are you still here? This kind of harassment. So you see, it was done with the steel hand in a kid glove, if I may say so. Yeah? But it was done. There was no way of staying, and there was no way of returning, because the houses of these people who went on this big trip, they were leveled, so they would have nowhere to return. So, yeah, and at the grassroots levels, that's how much I can tell you. But I would say there is a big gap to be researched, because there has never been any thorough research on this subject yet. What I have is from newspaper reports and from talking to some people whom I met.
I mean, it's like the expulsion of more than 250,000 people should leave some documents behind, because it's hard to organize.
That's a very good question. Where are the documents? Yeah, because that would be obvious. There are documents, everything is documented, and these guys can be indicted. A very strange thing happened on the 23rd of August, if I'm not mistaken, 1990, because the documents, most probably, we cannot be sure, were in the house of the party, Dom Party, which was the most important center of government and decision-making in any Soviet bloc country. And there were demonstrations in the front of this house of the party, and all of a sudden the house of party was ablaze at 9 p.m. And the house of the party at the time was the seat of the Communist Party, which was obviously by that time the name of the party was changed to the Social Democratic Party. And at that time, in 1990, the government was run by these reformed communists who became Social Democrats, and also the municipality was run by the very same party. And the house of the Communist Party is in the very center of Sofia. So when the fire started, the first fire brigade arrived only at 5 in the morning. Why? So either the documents were burned, or they were ostensibly burned, and they are kept by some people at home to be used as compromat. Yeah?
And that's true, but on the other hand, if you want to organize such an endeavor, because it's a big thing, there are always documents that come from the center to the regional, I don't know, organizers, activists. And I guess they couldn't do such a thing without written documents. Do you think?
I completely agree with you. But my book is the first ever on these things. So probably this lacunae in our knowledge must be filled up by further research. But I'm afraid that no further research will be done by any Bulgarian scholar, because it would mean, you know, getting fired from university or wherever you work. So it must be done by scholars from abroad, because then you are in the safe position of not having your job in the line of fire.
What about Turkish academics?
You see, that's a problem for me, because I actually got several books on the 25th anniversary, devoted to this event, which were published on the 25th anniversary of this expulsion. And I emailed the scholars who wrote the book. They never came back to me. I don't know what it means, you know, because I don't read Turkish, so I have some colleagues who read Turkish and help me with getting the stuff, getting some newspaper articles from Turkey. I had no clue, so that's another line which should be researched, especially by people with some knowledge of Turkish, I would say. But I've been trying to get in touch with these people. I have nothing as the proof of it. They never came back to me.
Javne?
How did the Turkish government react to the fact that they suddenly had to cope with this huge stream of...
They were kicking up an uproar, but in a very limited way, because it was hard for them to point the finger at Bulgaria when they were doing exactly the same thing to Kurds. Like in '85, Turks disappeared in Bulgaria. It was the last census in communist Bulgaria. And if you look at the censuses in Bulgaria since 1945 till 1989, you know, like in 47 you have like 20 minorities. And then the minorities are kind of disappearing. The returns of the census of 1975, they were secret. They were never published. And in 1985, the reports on the census were saying in Bulgaria only Bulgarians live. Could you repeat your question?
Because the reaction of the Turkish government...
Yeah. So, officially, there were no Turks in Bulgaria, and you couldn't use the word Turk. When the expulsion happened, they were referred to as Muslims. They were not referred to as Turks. It was prohibited to speak Turkish. You had actually, you know, these information plaques, but on the information plaques it was written, it is prohibited to speak the foreign language. The foreign language. If you spoke French, you know, German, no problem. Turkish, that's it. And Turkey was doing exactly the same thing vis-a-vis Kurds. They were called mountainous Turks. It was prohibited to speak Kurdish. And in 1985, this war against Kurds in eastern Turkey started. By 1989, Turks, the Turkish government and military, expelled from eastern Turkey to western Turkey around 100,000 Kurds. So they were not in a very good position to say that Bulgaria shouldn't be doing this when they were doing this. And Bulgaria in the Soviet bloc was responsible for channeling weapons to the Middle East, to the terrorist organizations. And they were also channeling weapons to the Kurds. So it was like a balancing act for Turkey, because if they start criticizing Bulgaria too strongly, Bulgaria would come with the criticism of the Kurdish policy.
I'm just like,
sorry.
please.
First of all, thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. I'm interested in today's political implications of this ethnic cleansing. You mentioned the declaration of Bulgarian parliament from 2012. Yes. Can you tell me a little bit more about it? Who initiated it? Why? What was the nature of parliamentary debate like?
There is a core of principled politicians, statesmen, I would say, in Bulgaria, who are not afraid to say, you know, black is black, white is white. And that's the truth. And in the 90s, there was a string of lone wolf politicians and one of president, some kind of a chairman of the parliament saying sorry to Turks and admitting to Turkish partners in Turkey that what happened was wrong. And in 2010, the discussion started actually in the parliament that it should be recognized, that these people should be indemnified, because some of them got indemnified for the raised houses, but you know, it was peanuts, and then was inflation gone. And the discussion, obviously, as you can imagine, there were these principal guys connected to these liberal parties or liberal wings in some parties, and communist and nationalist parties on the other side. Saying, you are traitors. You cannot speak like this. They are Turks. We had it. I mean, we had to do it. Zhivkov was a good leader. Maybe he should have done it in a nicer way. You know, it is like this kind of insidious discourse about Hitler. What Hitler did to Jews was bad. We would need a smaller Hitler. Just put things in order. You know. You see, so this insidious discourse is completely transposed to Bulgaria and mapped onto the Turks. Zhivkov was a good leader. He made some mistakes, but on the balance, he had he did more good than bad. And actually, until today, these populist parties, nationalist parties, communist and social democrats are against recognizing what happened and are against this declaration. Actually, when the declaration was passed by a slim majority in the parliament, the populist party, which was on the right at the time, Ataka, the Attack party, brought to the parliament a motion to declare this declaration null and void. So I would say that because the liberal parties lost in a big way across all the post-communist countries in Europe, so nowadays in Bulgaria, the coalition which governs the country is a mixture of populists, nationalists, and strangely enough, the Turkish party. So that's why the declaration which recognizes this event as ethnic cleansing is not acted upon. And you would say it is also to a degree a fault of this Turkish party and Ahmet Doğan. To give you just one example, the members of this party are trying so much to be good Bulgarians that they are sometimes better Bulgarian nationalists than Bulgarian nationalists. Last December, a Russian plane breached the airspace of Turkey and it was downed. You've heard about it, yeah? And at that time, the leader of the Turkish party in Bulgaria actually sided with Turkey. Yeah, good thing, you know, that's international law, that's law. I mean, you are flying to someone else's airspace and you are not announcing anything, you are not saying it's a mistake. That's it, because you might be attacking. Yeah? And immediately he was taken down from his position and replaced with another guy. And he was criticized across the spectrum of the Bulgarian mass media oh, I mean, you are simply wrong about everything and you are hurting the image of Bulgaria in the world. Meaning, good relation between Bulgaria and Russia. So yeah, it's a strange schizophrenic situation, I would say, and it doesn't help that people don't remember about the past. The past, which is within the living memory, the remembrance of it is completely suppressed.
Otherwise, was the Pomak community also equally targeted during the expulsion, or primarily Turks?
That's a very interesting thing. Turks were not targeted in the expulsion officially. But, oh yeah, it's also about the practicality of the practicalities of this expulsion at the grassroots level. We are talking a Soviet bloc country. In the Soviet bloc countries, people didn't have passports at home, so you couldn't travel freely. In April 1989, Zhivkov announced that beginning with October 1989, every citizen of Bulgaria would have his or her passport at home. October. However, they started issuing passports immediately in April and May to those people whom they identify unofficially as Turks. Yeah? So that was another, someone was asking how the expulsion was done, how the pressure was exerted. Yeah? So they were issued passports. Pomaks were not issued passports. And some of the Pomaks were pretty sour about it. Yeah? Because when all the Turks are gone, the natural social environment in which they live is gone. Yeah? Out of sudden, you don't have neighbors to talk to openly and honestly, and you don't have anyone to rely on. And Pomaks in July staged in the areas riots that they should be let out. But there is very little known about it. I just found some reports in British newspapers about it. Because they also wanted to go to Turkey. But they were not allowed. And then they were allowed to somehow. But how it happened, I don't know. And to what extent they were allowed, I don't know. There's also another interesting thing about these riots, which is completely unreported. I found some report that 100 people died in the riots. But once again, the thing is not very well researched, so I cannot say anything more. Another thing which I can talk, which I can mention in relation to Pomaks is that when Turks were expelled and they had to give up their property, some of them were doing it through the deed to the Pomak neighbors instead of giving it up to ethnic Bulgarians. That's how much I know about this Pomak dimension of this ethnic cleansing.
What were the legal basis for this property changing hands?
You know, the law in a communist Soviet-style state was what the party said. So whatever was needed was done on the hoof, or which couldn't be done on the hoof was done in blatant breach of legislation. And the law, whichever existed, was exerted in such a way that was to the financial disadvantage of Turks who had to leave. For instance, you had some loans to build a house, yeah? And the Turks who had to leave, they had to repay the loans before leaving, and they couldn't stay, so they had to find the money. So it was like the extortion by the state. There were cases like this too. But you know what? What were the legal basis for raising houses left by Turks and not taken by any neighbor. There was no legal basis. It was the party. What party said was legal. It is, you know, this kind of doctrine which Karl Schmitter referred to as decisionism. Whatever the leader says becomes the law.
Yeah, but still, the people who acted upon these orders on low levels had to have some mandate, and this mandate, usually people prefer to get some papers on which to base their actions.
I suppose the answer, tentative answer is like this, because as I told you, I haven't done research on the documents, archival documents, so I don't know. But when I was talking to my informant, and I was posing a very similar question like yours, they were saying that Zhivkov was trying to do as many things and to take as many decisions over the telephone without any formal paperwork. So there is no paperwork. You know, it is kind of similar to what happened with the genocide of Jews and Romans carried out by Hitler. There is no shred of a document with Hitler's signature to this.
But there's the one surviving document from the Wannsee conference, which yeah, I know that you know, of course.
But there is no paper trail which you can connect. And some people were telling me that Zhivkov was not tried because no paper trail was available for linking him to this crime. My answer to them was like yours. Well, there were certain effects of the decisions of this guy, and we know that at the time the only guy who was taking decisions in Bulgaria was Zhivkov. So on these circumstances, it should be pretty easy to try him and to sentence him. But yeah, there is no will basically to come to terms with what happened and to be open about it and actually to research it and identify the people who are directly responsible. There is no political will. And why there is no political will? Because many of these people are in power now, including Boyko Borisov.
And I mean, to add to this, also I would say that it probably has to do with the public opinion. I mean, obviously from what you said, with these counter demonstrations and so on, a lot of Bulgarians were actually supportive of this action. So they are still supporting this action, and they don't think it was wrong. So that has to do with the perception of these big expulsions and with the perception of Zhivkov too.
Especially as it was carried out in this humanitarian way, not shooting people.
I completely agree with you, but I suppose that's the role of the European Union. Because I believe, after the war, the majority of Germans and Austrians were silently supportive of what happened toward Jews and Romans during the war, and homosexuals and whatsoever. But it was the Allies who pressed Germany, not Austria, to actually come to terms with what happened and apologize and make amends for it. So the European Union, the Council of Europe, NATO probably should do it in the case of Bulgaria, but it's not happening. You wanted to ask some question?
Yeah. Well, I was under the impression, I met quite a few in Turkey, I met quite a few of Turkish citizens now who were born or are descendants of people who were born in Turkey. And it was always presented to me when we talked about it. It was just after the fall of or towards the fall, it's purely because of economic reasons and because it was possible, if it wouldn't be possible before.
Yeah.
I mean, in that sense, it's like calling East German exodus to West German. It's not, I mean, it's different.
Well, that's one of way of looking at it. But if these people had not been issued passports, they wouldn't have gone to Turkey. And Zhivkov in April 1989 promised passports for everyone in October. But strangely enough, passports began to be issued to ethnic Turks already in late April and May. Why? Because in April and May you have this kind of big demonstration, and the authorities rounded up around 1,000 dissidents, and they were sent away from Bulgaria, usually to Vienna. From Vienna they went to Turkey or Sweden or other places. And then they decided, we just expelled the rest. And Zhivkov was saying in this Politburo material, because they are available by this Cold War project, that Bulgaria, in order to survive, would have soon to get rid of around 300,000 to 500,000 Turks. Otherwise, it will be another Turkish sun. He was saying, he was openly speaking like this. Yeah? So, in a way, the intent is easily detected from his statements. But you know, that's, you present it like this, like your friends, or your friends probably are your age, so it was presented to them by school teachers and so on and so on. In this way, in order to forget it, in order not to be interested in it. But the military was involved, the politicians were involved, seizure of property was involved, ionization, you could say. So if you start scratching the surface out of sudden, you see the texture of the events, and you see that it was not voluntary. Probably in some cases it was voluntary. You know, like the Pomaks wanted to go, and they were not allowed to, which led to deaths and so on. But the vast majority of the people, for the vast majority of the people who were sent to Turkey, it was not voluntary.
I would just like to know how was with the return, because when we were speaking about these economic reasons, people returned after, half of them returned after 6 months.
Yes, yeah.
So it's not a collective disillusionment over the Western country and so on. So how was exactly the return, and which were the reasons for them to return?
Probably the first issue which should be answered is why Zhivkov allowed them to return. In the summer, the economic collapse. The economic collapse, like in late July, they issued, the Bulgarian parliament issued, how to say, the Peacetime Mobilization Act. So some people were obliged to work in the fields for free. They should provide their cars if they had them in order to harvest, you know, any crops which were to be harvested. And this Mobilization Act was targeted ostensibly at the entire population of Bulgaria. In reality, it was targeted at Turks and Pomaks living in these areas, and actually who were not allowed to go. One of the points of this act was that anyone aged 16 to 50 cannot leave the place of their residence and have to work for the prescribed hours and so on. And people obviously hated it. It was slavery. So when in August, late August, some families, like 50 families of Bulgarian Turks decided to return, they were allowed back. And for Zhivkov, it was also a propaganda coup. It wasn't an ethnic cleansing, you know. It was a big trip, and people are returning. That's how it was presented on TV. So, and then basically Zhivkov lost power. Yeah. So these kind of measures, the party we know from the inter-party talks that these measures against Turks, the party decided could have destroyed Bulgaria as a state. So it should have been stopped. And then the discussion was between September and November. And another discussion between November and January was how and when and in which way to return human rights and political rights to Turks. Now, these people who arrived en masse to Turkey, they were mostly housed in disused schools, but schools start teaching in September. Yeah? So out of sudden you have to get out from the school. And in refugee camps, but refugee camps are not very nice place to be. Then these Bulgarian Turks noticed that their Turkish is very different from the Turkish of the Turks, you know, because during the 1930s, 1920s, the Turkish language in Turkey was completely overhauled. And in the Balkans, outside Turkey, this traditional Turkish survived. So out of sudden, they couldn't communicate very well. So that was the problem of communication. So out of sudden, we were foreigners in Bulgaria. We are coming to Turkey once again. We are foreigners. The Turkish government wanted to send them to Eastern Turkey, where Eastern Turkey was actively emptied of Kurds. And the Bulgarian Turks didn't want it. No, that's crazy. So they wanted to stay in the European part of Turkey to be close to Europe. But at that time, Turkey had hyperinflation. Economy was not working. The war started against Kurds. There were Kurdish refugees from Iraq. Turkey got flooded, so these Bulgarian Turks didn't get much help. And beginning in September, in October, they had to find their own place to live. They had to find work. There was no work for them, at least no work they would aspire to. On the average, because of these educational policies in the Soviet bloc countries, Bulgarian Turks were better educated than Turks in Turkey. And they had a certain aspiration. I was a teacher in Bulgaria, I want to be a teacher in Turkey. No, in Turkey you can be a chamberlain. So out of sudden many people got this illusion and they started returning. And out of sudden there were changes in Bulgaria. So, well, you can return, why not? That was the dynamic. But obviously they got, they returned to Bulgaria. Where is my house? And they had to leave, you live under sheets of plastic. Or they returned to Bulgaria and in January 1990 there are anti-Turkish demonstrations. 1 million people get out. So it was pretty crazy for these people because it was like going from one bad situation to another bad situation and back to another bad situation. Which also explains the success of Ahmed Doğan's this Turkish party movements for rights and freedom, because officially it was registered on the 7th of January, and by February it had already 100,000 members. So you could see it, yeah? And then there was the move to deregister this party, the move which was put by these former communists in April, and there was discussion if to deregister this party for a year, but after 1 year they said, okay, the party may stay. Obviously, why the court decided like this? Because taking away this party in 91 from the political system of Bulgaria would have caused a complete collapse of the political system in Bulgaria and a civil war.
Do we have any other questions? My questions were already answered, so if there are...
Are you sure?
No, I will ask you afterwards.
No, you can ask now, because they...
I just, maybe I wanted to have this parallel with how it was done on the level this ethnic cleansing, how it was done on a smaller level, I don't know, of administration or just talking, and they were issued passports which they were not issued before and so on. We had a very interesting parallel regarding similarities and differences in Slovenian case in erased people, especially because they were not actually moved anywhere. They were just their documents were destroyed. It was very simple, and but there was some parallels. It was done on this level of, I don't know, administration, low level administration. Oh, give me your identity card. You don't exist anymore. So I think there are certain parallels that it would be worth to explore how this homogenization of national space from the years 1990 in this period was done. It was not so. It was not done openly. Maybe it was done more to this low-key administration work. It's still present in European Union now. It's declarative. Everyone is equal. But if you come to terms of your real situation, the structure of the state, then things got different. And just like to comment.
I would say that's a good line, but I wouldn't blame the European Union like this.
I would say, want to blame you.
I would say,
trying to say there are similarities.
I would say the case of the erase, of which I've heard, but details of which I do not know, was simply this carry over of the arbitrary application of law in the communist state. Because whatever the party decided was becoming the law, and whatever party decided and didn't want to know the public, didn't want the public to know, was done on the sly.
But it was done in 92 in democracy.
Yeah, I just wonder about the quality of democracy in '92 after the war.
Yeah, of course.
So I would say, you see, you have this transition period when some elements of the communist system remaining and some elements of democratic system are being implemented. And you know, you can use the case of the Czech Republic. Yeah? When Czechoslovakia split in 1993, it was already democratic. Yeah? But out of sudden they decided that the Roma living in the Czech Republic, 200,000 people, they would not be issued with Czech citizenship. Because
on this level,
truly speaking, they are Slovak Roma, yeah? But they were born and raised and educated in the Czech Republic when Czechoslovakia existed as a state. And only the European Union brought this situation, rectified the situation, because when the Czech Republic was negotiating accession to the European Union said, well, guys, you don't give them citizenship, you are not becoming a member of the European Union. And then, out of sudden.
Yes, it was similarly erased because the European Court decided that it should be, that the rights should be restored. And it was still not done in that fashion, but I was very interested in this level of how things are done on low level and like nothing is happening. I have another parallel with this very interesting nostalgia, Živko nostalgia, which can also be, in terms of differences, parallel to Yugoslav Tito nostalgia, which has completely different implications, but it also comes from some kind of nostalgia. But in Tito's case, it was a multinational, not multi-republic, I will say in a way, state, at least in terms of Slovenians, because Slovenia was regarded, the Slovenians already in the times of Yugoslavia, as a national state in a way. But it has completely different feel because of this national leadership. Because now Yugo nostalgia is something that it lives on its own. It is considered to be sometimes in opposition, if you're Yugo nostalgic, to particular nation state in XU space. But in case of Živko, it's actually state supported in a way. And it's very interesting to compare these two phenomena.
Yeah, the cult of Tito is kind of disconnected from the nation state which exists nowadays. It's kind of exists virtually. Exists like the Serbo-Croatian Wikipedia, which is the biggest of all the post-Yugoslav Wikipedia, although the Serbo-Croatian language officially doesn't exist. And there are these self-declared Yugoslavs who still, you know, like in the American census 10 years ago, there was like 500,000 Yugoslavs in the United States. You know, so, and in Bulgaria, it's still very much connected to the conflict between the two visions of the one single nation state. The nation state should be ethno-linguistic and ethno-religiously homogeneous, or it should be liberal. Yeah? And there is an uneasy coexisting of these two models, because the active use of this national revolution of ethno-linguistic and ethno-religious homogenization came to an end in 1989. But there is a strong desire for reactivating it. And the cult of Zhivkov is part and parcel of it. And the checks and balances are put nowadays in Bulgaria in such a way that this national revolution is kept in checks. But you know, it may happen one day that it blows up into our face.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, I would like to thank our speaker for this opportunity to listen to him, to listen to this incredibly interesting and lecture. It was very intriguing, and it gave us a lot to think, and that's what the most important thing. So, thank you again.